The rain was relentless, hammering the roof of my Seattle apartment like it wanted to break through and drown me. I stood at the window, watching the city blur into streaks of neon and gray, when I saw him. A man slumped against the alley wall, soaked, shivering, and staring at nothing. Something in his hollow eyes hooked me, like a fish caught on a line, and before I knew it, I was out there, dragging a stranger into my life. My name's Elias Navarro, 28, a barista by day and a failed poet by night, living in a cramped studio above a dive bar in Capitol Hill. I'm not the hero type, too cynical, too broke, but that night, I couldn't walk away. He was maybe 30, tall and lean, with sandy blonde hair plastered to his face and a jawline that could have been chiseled by some cruel god who knew I'd fall for it. His clothes were torn, his hands scraped raw, and when I asked his name, he just blinked at me, like I'd asked him to solve quantum physics. "I don't know," he whispered, voice rough like he'd screamed it raw. No wallet, no ID, just a silver ring on his left hand that glinted under my flickering kitchen light. I gave him dry clothes, my old flannel and sweatpants that hung loose on his frame, and made him coffee, the cheap kind that tastes like regret. He sat on my couch, clutching the mug like it was the only thing tethering him to the world. "You can't stay out there," I said, trying to sound firm, but my voice cracked. "You'll freeze. Or worse." He looked up, eyes a stormy gray, and said, "Why are you doing this?" I didn't have an answer. Maybe it was the poet in me, chasing a story. Maybe it was the loneliness that had settled into my bones like damp rot. "Just stay here tonight," I muttered. "We'll figure it out." By morning, he was still there, curled up on my couch like a stray dog, too tired to run. I called him gray for those eyes, and he didn't object. The hospital was my next stop, dragging him along to check for injuries or clues. The doctor, a tired woman with a clipboard, confirmed he had retrograde amnesia, total memory loss from some trauma they couldn't pinpoint. No concussion, no drugs, just a brain that had hit reset. "He needs stability," she said. "Familiarity. Someone to anchor him." I laughed, bitter. "I'm nobody's anchor." But Gray looked at me, not pleading, not desperate, just lost. And I was screwed. Days turned into weeks. Gray became my shadow, following me to the coffee shop where I worked, sitting in the corner with a book he didn't read, watching me like I was his only map. I taught him how to make coffee, how to navigate Seattle's labyrinth of streets, how to laugh at my terrible jokes. He relied on me for everything: where to eat, what to wear, how to exist. It was exhausting, but it was also something else. His smile, rare and fleeting, started to feel like a reward I didn't deserve. One night, after a long shift, we sat on my tiny balcony, the city humming below. He leaned close, his shoulder brushing mine, and said, "Elias, what if I never remember?" "Then you make new memories," I said, trying to sound wise, but my heart was pounding. His hand found mine, tentative, warm, and I didn't pull away. It was the first time I realized I might be falling for him. This man with no past, no name, just a ring that taunted me with questions. Weeks later, I found him staring at that ring, twisting it on his finger. "What if I'm married?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. My stomach dropped. "We'll figure it out," I said, but the words tasted like ash. I started digging. Hospital records, missing persons reports, anything. Nothing matched. No one was looking for him. It was like he'd fallen from the sky. Then, one rainy afternoon, everything changed. We were at the coffee shop, Gray wiping down tables, when a woman burst in, her eyes wild. She was in her 30s, with sharp cheekbones and a designer coat that screamed money. She froze when she saw Gray, her breath catching. "James," she said, voice trembling. Gray turned, confusion etching his face. "Do I know you?" Her name was Claire, and she claimed Gray, James, was her fiancé. She had photos, texts, a whole life I'd never seen. My heart sank as she showed me a picture of them laughing at a vineyard, his arm around her, that same ring gleaming. He disappeared 6 months ago, she said, tears streaming. We thought he was dead. I looked at Gray, hoping he'd deny it, but he just stared, lost again. Claire reached for him, and he flinched. I don't remember you, he said, and her face crumpled. She turned to me, eyes narrowing. Who are you to him? Nobody, I said, but the lie burned. I was the one who'd picked him up, pieced him together, fallen for him. And now, I might lose him to a past he couldn't even recall. That night, Gray sat on my couch, head in his hands. Elias, I don't feel anything for her. But this ring, it's real. What if I'm supposed to be with her? I wanted to scream that he belonged here, with me, but I didn't. Instead, I said, you don't owe her your life. You get to choose. He looked at me, eyes searching. What if I choose you? My breath caught. Gray, you don't even know who you are. I know you, he said, and leaned in, kissing me softly, like he was afraid I'd vanish. It was everything, warm, desperate, real, but it terrified me. Because that ring, that past, was a shadow we couldn't outrun. Claire wasn't going away. She showed up at the coffee shop the next day, her presence like a storm cloud over my already chaotic life. She brought more proof, letters, a lease for an apartment in Portland, even a video of Gray, James, proposing to her at a beach house. I watched it on her phone, my chest tightening as he knelt, smiling like he'd found his forever. Gray watched too, his face blank, like he was staring at a stranger. I don't feel it, he whispered to me later, when we were alone in my apartment. I see the pictures, the videos, but it's like watching someone else's life. Then why do you keep looking at that ring? I asked, sharper than I meant. He flinched, and I hated myself for it. Because it's the only thing I have, he said. It's proof I was someone before this. I wanted to tell him he was enough as Gray, that he didn't need a past to be whole, but Claire's shadow loomed. She started calling, texting, begging him to come to Portland, to see their old apartment, to try to remember. I hated how her voice made him doubt, how it made him pull away from me, even if just a little. One night, he caught me staring at him while he read one of my poems on the couch. What? He asked, a shy smile breaking through. You're too good at being here, I said. It's like you've always been part of this mess. He laughed, soft, and moved closer. Maybe I was meant to find you. I kissed him then, harder than before, like I could anchor him to me, to this moment. But even as his hands tangled in my hair, I felt the weight of that ring, cold and heavy between us. Claire insisted on a trip to Portland, saying familiarity might jog his memory. Against my better judgment, I went with them. I told myself it was to protect Gray, but deep down, I was terrified of losing him. The drive was tense, Claire in the front seat of her sleek SUV, Gray beside her, me in the back like an afterthought. She talked about their old life, dinners at fancy restaurants, hiking in the Cascades, plans for a wedding next spring. Gray nodded politely, but his eyes kept finding mine in the rearview mirror. Their apartment was pristine, all glass and marble, nothing like my cluttered studio. Claire showed him photos on the walls, his clothes still in the closet, a guitar he supposedly played. You love this place, she said, her voice breaking. You loved me. Gray touched the guitar, his fingers hesitant, like he was afraid it would bite. I'm sorry, he said. I don't know this. Claire's face hardened. You're not trying hard enough, James. You owe me that much. I wanted to snap at her, to tell her he didn't owe her anything, but Gray's hand on my arm stopped me. Let's go, he said quietly, and we left Claire standing in her perfect apartment, her eyes burning holes into my back. Back in Seattle, things shifted. Gray started asking questions. not about his past, but about us. "What happens if I never remember?" he asked one night, lying beside me in my too small bed. "Would you still want me?" I turned to him, tracing the line of his jaw. "I want you now. That's enough." But it wasn't. Claire hired a private investigator, and soon, we had answers. Too many. Gray's real name was James Carter, 30, a software engineer from Portland. He'd vanished after a car accident on a coastal road. His car found wrecked, but empty. No one knew how he'd ended up in Seattle, or why he hadn't been found sooner. The investigator dug up more. James had been distant before he disappeared, fighting with Claire, questioning their engagement. It wasn't a perfect love story like she'd painted. Gray, James, took it hard. He spent hours on my balcony, staring at the city, trying to piece himself together. "I don't want to be him," he said one night, voice raw. "James sounds like someone I wouldn't like." "Then don't be," I said, sitting beside him. "Be Gray. Be you." He kissed me then, fierce and desperate, like he was claiming himself for the first time. But the next morning, Claire called again, saying she'd found a therapist who specialized in amnesia. "He can help you remember," she said. "You can come home." Gray looked at me, phone in hand, and I saw the war in his eyes. "What if I don't want to remember?" he asked her, but his eyes were on me. The therapist's office in Portland was sterile, all white walls and fake plants, like it was trying too hard to be calming. Dr. Nguyen, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s, explained memory retrieval techniques, hypnosis, guided recall, exposure to familiar objects. Gray sat stiffly, his hands clenched, while Claire hovered, her hope palpable. I stood by the door, feeling like an intruder in his past. "I don't want to force it," Gray said, glancing at me. "What if I'm happy where I am?" Claire's eyes flashed. "Happy? With him? James, you don't even know who you are." "I know enough," he shot back, and my heart skipped. But Dr. Nguyen urged him to try, saying even partial recovery could bring closure. Gray agreed, reluctantly, and I hated how it felt like losing him one session at a time. Over weeks, he went to therapy twice a week, Claire footing the bill. Sometimes I drove him, sitting in the waiting room like a nervous parent, flipping through outdated magazines. Other times, Claire insisted on taking him, and I'd spend those hours pacing my apartment, wondering if each session was stitching him back into James Carter, the man who didn't know me. But Gray came back to me every night, curling up on my couch, telling me about the sessions. "It's like chasing ghosts," he said once, his head on my shoulder. "I see flashes, rain, a car, a fight, but they don't feel like mine." "Then let them go," I said, but my voice shook. I was falling harder every day, and it scared me. What if he remembered loving Claire? What if he left? One evening, after a session, he came home different, quiet, haunted. "I remembered something," he said, sitting on my kitchen counter, the ring glinting in the dim light. "I was driving that night, the night of the accident. I was angry. I think I was leaving her." My breath caught. "Leaving Claire?" He nodded. "I don't know why, but I felt trapped, like I was living someone else's life." I wanted to cheer, to kiss him, but his eyes were so heavy. I just held his hand. "You don't have to be that person anymore," I said. He looked at me, raw and open. "I want to be yours." That night, we made love for the first time, slow and careful, like we were mapping each other's scars. It was more than physical. It was a promise, a defiance of the past trying to claim him. But the next day, Claire showed up at my apartment, her face a mask of fury. "You're poisoning him," she spat. "He's not yours to keep, Elias. He's James, my James. He's not property." I snapped, stepping between her and Gray. "He gets to decide." Gray stood behind me, his hand on my back. "Claire, I'm not coming back. I don't know who I was, but I know who I am now." She left, slamming the door, but her words lingered like poison. I started noticing things, missed calls on Gray's phone, Letters from Claire slipped under my door, begging him to try harder to remember. She wasn't giving up, and it was tearing Gray apart. One night, I found him on the balcony, staring at the ring. "I need to know," he said. "Not for her. For me." He decided to go back to the coastal road where his car crashed, hoping it would unlock the final pieces. I drove him, the 2-hour trip silent except for the hum of the engine. The road was narrow, winding along cliffs that dropped into the churning Pacific. We found the spot, a sharp curve marked by faded skid marks. Gray stood there, wind whipping his hair, and closed his eyes. "I remember," he whispered after a long silence. "I was running. Not just from her, from everything. I didn't want that life." He turned to me, tears in his eyes. "I chose this. I chose you." But when we got back to Seattle, Claire was waiting at my apartment, holding a police report. "James, you weren't alone in that car," she said, her voice trembling with something darker than grief. "There was someone else." The police report was a gut punch. The car accident, 6 months ago, wasn't just Gray, James, losing control. There was a passenger, a man named Ryan, 29, who'd been reported missing the same night. Claire held the paper like a weapon, her eyes locked on Gray. "You were with him," she said. "You were leaving me for him." Gray's face went pale, his hands shaking as he took the report. I read over his shoulder, my heart racing. "Ryan Keller, a graphic designer from Portland, last seen with James Carter. No body was found, but his belongings were in the wreckage: a wallet, a phone, a sketchbook. The police assumed he'd been thrown into the ocean. Case closed." "I don't remember him," Grace said, voice breaking. "I don't remember anyone." Claire's laugh was bitter. "You cheated on me, James. You broke my heart, and now you're playing house with him." She jabbed a finger at me, and I felt the air leave the room. "Enough," I said, stepping forward. "He's not your James anymore. He's Gray, and he's here because he wants to be." But Gray was unraveling, staring at the report like it was a death sentence. "What if I was a bad person?" he whispered. "What if I hurt people?" I grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at me. "You're not that person. You're the guy who helps me close the coffee shop, who laughs at my dumb poems, who makes me feel like I'm enough. That's who you are." He leaned into me, sobbing, and I held him, ignoring Claire's glare. She left, but the damage was done. Gray became obsessed with Ryan, scouring the internet for clues, piecing together fragments of a life he couldn't claim. Ryan was an artist, vibrant, loved by his friends, openly gay. There were photos of him and James at bars, laughing, close. It was like staring at a ghost who had a better claim to Gray than I did. One night, Gray found Ryan's sketchbook, mailed to us by the police after Claire's tip. It was filled with drawings of James, his smile, his eyes, the ring on his finger. On the last page, a note: "I'll follow you anywhere, Jay." Gray broke down, guilt eating him alive. "What if I loved him?" he asked. "What if I was running away with him?" "Then you still get to choose now," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "You're not bound by a past you don't remember." He looked at me, eyes red. "I choose you, Elias. But I need to know the truth. For me." We tracked down Ryan's best friend, Mia, a tattoo artist in Portland. She met us at a diner, her eyes wary but kind. "Ryan loved James," she said. "They were together for a year, secret because James was engaged. He was going to leave Claire that night. They were driving to start over." "What happened?" Gray asked, voice barely audible. Mia shrugged, tears welling. "The car crashed. Ryan didn't make it. I thought you were gone too, James." Gray gripped my hand under the table. "I'm not James," he said. "Not anymore." Mia nodded, understanding. She gave him Ryan's sketchbook, saying it belonged to him. That night, Gray burned the sketchbook in a fire pit on the beach, the flames eating away the past. "I'm letting him go," he said, his voice steady. "I'm letting James go." Back in Seattle, Gray took off the ring and placed it in a drawer. I don't need it anymore, he said. I know who I am. A month later, we stood on that cliffside from the image prompt, the Pacific stretching endless before us. Gray, still gray, always gray, took my hand, his smile brighter than the sunset. I want to be your husband, he said. No ring, no past, just us. I laughed, tears in my eyes. You sure you're ready for my bad poetry forever? Try me, he said, and kissed me, the wind carrying away the last shadows of doubt. We weren't perfect. Claire still called sometimes, and Gray still had moments where he questioned himself. But we built a life, our life, on choices, not memories. And in the end, that was enough.